All right, conference finals, Eastern Conference rematch from the bubble. Third time in 4 years. We've got the Celtics Heat in the conference finals. Got to give Spo a lot of credit. We'll get to some player stuff here in a second. I just want to point out something that I think is important in the playoffs. Spo's willingness to adapt, tinker, try new things, adjust game to game, within a game. Like when I look at a coach's mindset, right? And I'm sure there's hard conversations in that locker room. He does it in the regular season too. It's not about your minutes, the normal rotation, how many shots you get, how many plays you get called for. It's about one thing. It's like, how do we put ourselves in a position to win a basketball game?
Yep.
And he does that as a coach better than anyone else. We got to go zone here. Whatever it may, you know what? We need more shooting. Duncan, get your ass on the court. Like, he just adjusts game to game. And for anyone thinking, I don't know what the game, 4 games, 5 games, 6 games, I don't know what it's going to be. I just know the Boston Celtics are in a dogfight in this conference finals.
I was going to ask about, in general, when you have these rematches like this and the personnel hasn't changed that much, there's obviously going to be game-to-game specific adjustments depending on how people are playing and health and things like that. But structurally, like, how much can you really do when there's so much of a familiarity already?
Oh, I'm glad you bring this up because it's one of the points I wanted to make. No P.J. Tucker this year. So P.J. Tucker was the primary defender on Jayson Tatum last year in the conference finals. In the regular season this year, Caleb Martin and Haywood Highsmith got most of the matchups against Tatum. It goes back to a larger point I would make about both these teams. There's going to be, I would guess, there's going to be a lot of lineup tinkering, game to game. Does Kevin Love continue to start? Right? Maybe they put Caleb Martin in to start because of the 2 J's.
Yeah.
Right? Take a little bit of that pressure of Jimmy Butler having to be a primary defender on a primary scorer. Take that off of him. All right? So that's one thing. On the other end, we saw in the Philly series, Boston tinker with their starting lineup. They went back to the 2 big look. Well, if Miami goes small, now does Boston go back with Derek White in the starting lineup and take Rob Williams out? So I think game to game within this series, there's going to be lineup tinkering. And I think that point about Tatum not having P.J. Tucker, we brought this up last year with that Milwaukee series. Not having P.J. Tucker in that Milwaukee series certainly hurt Milwaukee. So I think that's something to watch. Who's sort of matching up, lineup tinkering, all that stuff. The other point I want to make, it goes into, this is my basic analysis. Let's take away the 3-point shooting variance because I think both teams will try to shoot a lot of threes. That we've seen that in the playoffs from Miami. We've seen that all season for Boston. Jimmy and Tatum and Brown, those 3 guys, those are the primary shot creators for the Boston Celtics and the Miami Heat. Jimmy looking to establish himself as a scorer early. Obviously, his whole thing is, can I draw a second defender, make a pass? We get ball movement. I mean, we saw that Friday night. It's like once you get that second defender, it's an avalanche of swings till you either get an open 3 or you drive a closeout for a layup or floater, right? They do that as well as anyone. Boston does it well too. Okay. So in this series, you're talking about the Celtics, who were this team that switched the second most pick and rolls, and the Heat, who switched the third most pick and rolls. This series very well may come down to which star player can most consistently break down their primary defender and draw 2 to the ball.
Yeah.
And I thought that happened more yesterday for the Celtics, and some of it was just incredible shot making, but against switching defense, and Miami will switch and the Celtics will switch, it's that to me feels like one thing that could help determine this series.
How much zone do you expect from Miami?
Oh, they're going to mix it up. I mean, the Sixers had some success, particularly in Game 5 in Boston with the zone. Spo is a film room guy. Like they're going to. I look at it this way because I've in calling games, I probably noticed this more. It's just less distractions. Teams typically go zone based on certain lineups. So let's say Jalen Brunson's out of the game. All right, we're going to go zone, right? That's what the Heat did in that second quarter against the Knicks. Got them back in the game. So I don't know who it would be for Boston, but let's say one of Tatum and Brown are off the floor. All right, they're playing a 2 big lineup in the second quarter. Let's go zone, right? They're going to look to mix it in based on the lineups. Teams have done this with the Phoenix Suns and playing box and 1 on Devin Booker. It's like we're going to play box and 1 on Devin Booker when he's on the court and there's no Chris Paul, right? That sort of is when you tinker with the coverages. One other thing, did you pay attention at all to Tatum and Marcus Smart's comments about the home crowd
yesterday?
Just leading up to Game 7. So after the game in Game 6, Tatum called out the Boston home crowd, said, "You guys have been a little subdued for the playoffs. We're going to need you at your best." They asked Marcus Smart, "What do you expect? What do you want from the Boston home crowd?" And he said, "Chaos," which I thought was great. And it seemed, again, I wasn't there, but watching on television, it seemed like yesterday's crowd was a little more lit.
Yeah, they were loud as shit. You can tell.
And so how Miami had home court last year. How much is home court going to dictate this series?
Yeah.
We know Miami's a late arriving crowd. They typically get into it in the second half of the third quarter is really when the crowd gets going. It was, with Game 6 closeout game the other night. I can say
that's generous.
I was at the game. That's when they got into it. There's nothing against that. We all know this.
That's a real thing. We talked about that with Al with the Boston crowd in general. I think my question with Miami, and I'm curious what you think, even from calling the game Friday. They shot 45% from 3 in the Milwaukee series, which is a big reason why they won. So Jimmy's, sort of heroics aside, a big reason why they won. They came back down to earth. They basically came back to where they were during the regular season, which was the 27th or 28th best three-point shooting team in the league. Yep. Which is kind of amazing that they're advanced shooting like that. Besides the obvious, like just make shots, like what do you do to push it back up closer to 40? Because it feels like if they can't approach that percentage shooting wise, it's going to be really tough for them to win.
Yeah, great point. So a couple things on this. I asked Spo a little bit about this pregame on Friday. He said 2 things that were interesting to me. Number one, he said he feels like when they are shooting the ball well, as long as they're generating good looks, he feels like floodgates are going to open, right? He wants his guys to take as many good threes as possible. So he doesn't seem concerned about this variance. And the second point, and we brought this up in late March on the podcast, we brought up the Heat on one of these old men in the three things, and we talked about basically from the All-Star break on, they were a top 10 offense. They were top 10 in 3-point percentage. Like the Milwaukee series, to me, based on recent play, was not necessarily an outlier. Now, it was at the extreme end of good shooting. I get that. The outlier based on the last 2 months felt more like the Knicks series, right? Yeah. And I brought up this concept of like being able to draw the second defender and get open looks from 3, because I do think that largely will determine the series. The Boston Celtics are going to try to shoot 40 to 45 threes a game, right? They were top 2 all season with the Warriors in attempts and makes. They fluctuated, but they were in the top 5 to 10 all season in 3-point percentage. Like, this is how they play. So if you're the Heat, a lot is going to come down to Jimmy Butler, of course. The other guy who was really impressive in that Knicks series was Kyle Lowry.
Yep.
He brings a change of pace in terms of pushing the ball, his throw-aheads, even within the half court. He's flying off dribble handoffs. He's coming off where Jimmy, when he's more methodical in the pick and roll. Kyle very much is a pace creator. So he's going to be a key guy because it's that downhill effect, drawing 2 to the basketball, getting into drive and kick game, getting into swing action. Kyle's going to be a key piece for the Miami Heat in this series by creating pace and generating open looks that way.